In today's Missing, we have part 2 with Richard Price, the man who did a deep dive into the murder of Holly Piirainen on his own podcast called Holly's Been Taken. Lance, what'd you think of this conversation?
Well, I think it definitely warranted a two-parter. The way Richard pieces together the disappearance, the way he pieces together the whole story and presents it to the listener. When he did it on this show in particular, we were captivated, and I'm sure the listeners are going to be captivated by part 2. But the podcast that he has, really unbelievable work that he's done. It is one of the most genuine podcasts that I've heard in a while, and he clearly did it with the desire to actually do some good in this case. So he came in, did the episodes that he did, and left it out there for the public to consume. He wasn't trying to get on the Apple charts or anything like that, and that's cool if he gets on the charts, but this was done simply to keep the conversation about Holly alive and out there in the public.
Absolutely. And Holly was 10 years old when she went missing from Sturbridge, Massachusetts in August of 1993. Her body was later found in October of that same year in Brimfield, Massachusetts. So those two areas come up quite a bit in this conversation. And really, we're right in the weeds, right in the thick of the story and the persons of interests when we start this conversation in part 2 here with Richard. And if you haven't listened to part 1 with him, I suggest you go back and listen to that before you continue here, because in fact, we're really right in the middle of our discussion about Rodney Stanger, who is quite a person of interest in this case, and Molly Bish's case as well. Okay, so stick around to the end of the conversation. Lance and I will return for some quick final thoughts.
And be sure to follow us on social media at MissingCSM. And we're going to break real quick for commercial, and we will return with the second part of our conversation with Richard Price.
Okay, we're jumping right into the middle of the conversation about Rodney Stanger. And Richard goes on to talk about Rodney and Rodney Stanger's brothers and even their father in the rest of this segment. Again, definitely listen to part 1 of this interview if you haven't heard it yet.
So I ended up reaching out to Beverly Ann Stanger, who at the time was married to Rodney's brother, David Stanger. Beverly and David, for a while, were living in Florida near Rodney and Crystal. So they saw a lot of them. And Rodney was very close to David. They used to talk they would talk on the phone all the time. They would see each other. So before they moved to Florida, Beverly and David lived on New Boston Road. New Boston Road is a connecting road to Allen Road. Allen Road, of course, connects to South Shore Drive, where Holly was abducted. So they lived very close at the time. David is not exactly an altar boy. I'll put it to you that way. For quite a while, the brother Randy lived in a trailer on their property. However, he had moved out months before the abduction. And Rodney used to come over all the time, and he would hang out with David, and they would drink beer or whatever. And I think Rodney was just kind of a lonely guy, and he liked his brother, and they got along, and whatever. Rodney, David, and Randy were outdoorsmen. They liked to hunt and fish, but they really liked to hunt, and they were very familiar with the woods that we've been talking about in Brimfield. They used to hunt there. They used to go out there every fall and hunt. David's been in trouble with the law before, and one of them was was charged with hunting without a license, things like that. So I believe that to be true. One thing that did happen with Randy's another one that's had his share of troubles, put it mildly. In 1990, Randy lived in a tent in the Brimfield woods in the area where Holly was found 3 years later. Here we are again, back in that same spot. It's like everyone who's whether you're a hunter or a fisherman, you know where it is. But if you also happen to be a little bit shady or very shady, you know where to go. It's like the place to be in order to be and not be seen. So he used to live in the woods in a tent for quite a while because he was avoiding a warrant. There was a warrant out for his arrest. And this was when Beverly was dating David, and they used to go out there to bring him food, provisions. Then there is their father, Theodore. So let's say a little bit more of a setup here. Theodore died in 1989. He lived in a school bus, basically, in Brimfield on a lot that the owner let him live on. They just, wanted to give the guy a break. And so he lived on this school bus and died on that bus. And I think it was pretty much natural causes, I believe. I think he had heart problems or something like that. That was on Apple Road in Brimfield in 1989. Fast forward to October 22nd, 1993. Holly was still missing and would be discovered about 24 hours later on October 23rd. But on October 22nd, a 12-year-old boy named Scott Shosik stepped out of his home. And as he was walking to his friends, a man drove up in a sedan and propositioned him and invited him to go to McDonald's with him. And Scott ran into a neighbor's yard and started screaming. And he said the neighbors came out and the man in the sedan sped away. So I found a newspaper article about that. And it struck me because neither the mainstream media nor the police made a big deal out of it, because less than a day later, Holly was discovered in the Brimfield woods. But when I read that article about Theodore Stanger dying on that school bus in Apple Road, the Telegram and Gazette wrote a story on that. And in it, they interviewed a woman who lived across the street from there, and her name, and it was Marie Shosik. And I thought, Marie Shosik. And then sure enough, Scott Shosik, 3 years later, her son lived on Apple Road. And here was Theodore, who lived across the street from the Shosiks on Apple Road and died 4 years earlier. And he was the father of the Stangers. And here we are again saying, things that make you go, I don't have any evidence about that. But here we have a bunch of things that are all of a sudden kind of floating in together. I'm going to call all this stuff coincidence, because no one's ever been charged with the abduction and murder. But it was worth mentioning in the podcast. And honestly, I think I don't understand why the media or law enforcement made a bigger deal out of what had gone on in 1993, the day before Holly was discovered. I think the public should have been known in a much stronger fashion. But here we are.
Yeah, definitely very interesting stuff, and the timing is just bizarre. Okay, now the man in the pickup truck. That seems to be a very good suspect. And was the pickup truck brown or tan? I think in some of the accounts out there, it sounds like it's brown, but I'm not sure that was the case.
So in the retired investigators, there's a website out that retired investigators gave a very good kind of narrative about what happened that day. And in that, they described a pickup truck which as either white or light brown. There's a lot of different people have different accounts about what it actually looked like. One case that I came across that became that episode that I call The Man in the Pickup had his truck, according to his ex-wife, was dark brown. But his history is very revealing and honestly very alarming too.
I was really impressed with the way that you dug into this person's background and even spoke with him. That's pretty wild. But yeah, can you take us through some of, I guess, what makes him a good potential person of interest?
Yes. In the retired detective's timeline, they talked about the brown pickup truck and the person that propositioned what they said were two teenage girls, and that they believe that because of that and the timeline and the close proximity to where Holly was abducted and the low crime rate of the area, that the person who was behind the wheel of that truck is more than likely the person responsible for Holly's abduction. So that kind of became a big focus of mine, is to figure out who that person was. And I approached it in a lot of different ways. One of the initial ways that I did was to submit public records requests for traffic violations back then. So I kind of cast a wide net looking for somebody that would be driving a truck that was in that area around that time that might have been pulled over, and that would be a lead. It was a needle in a haystack kind of thing. But it did bear fruit. I think that even a blind chicken, if they peck the ground enough times, they're gonna find a kernel of corn, right? And I think that was the case here. And what that did was that it led me to another public records request, which revealed a police report, which gave me a very nice narrative. So as we know, right around by 12:52 p.m. on August 5th, 1993, Holly's dad called the police, and they began a search effort there. And in that search effort, they had discovered that to be on the lookout for a brown pickup truck, which was, a witness had said, was speeding away from the scene right around that time. A police officer that I interviewed, he was called into the scene to be part of the search. As he was driving, he spotted a pickup truck which matched the description. So he pulled him over and approached the vehicle, and the person inside the vehicle did not appear to be alarmed or agitated or nervous or anything like that. Took his driver's license and did a quick eyeball of the vehicle, didn't notice anything alarming about it. Like, didn't notice any handcuffs or zip ties or anything that appeared to be, that showed that there had been something nefarious. He called it in. A second backup came over. The police officer was looking for some reason to detain him. Dispatch came back and they said that his license was active. The guy had no reason to keep him, so the cops sent him on his way. What I found out later was that there was another police officer who lived nearby to this particular person who was driving the pickup truck, and he lived in Sturbridge. He was a police officer in a neighboring town, and he had pulled that guy over about a week prior for a traffic violation, and he noticed that the guy's registration had expired. So this cop saw, after August 5th, he saw that guy again while he was off duty. He saw him driving around and he went, holy crap. So he calls the Sturbridge Police Department and he says, I know that guy and his tags are not current. He's not current. So they ran it again, and sure enough, he had expired registration. So somebody had made a mistake at the time on August 5th. The police officer at the time on August 5th said, if I had known that, he said, I would have detained him and we would have been able to interview him. He said it was a lost opportunity. So all they did was they mailed a citation to him. Much later, after that, investigators ended up getting a warrant And they impounded the truck and they did a deep search of it, but found no evidence. I don't know how long after the disappearance it was before they finally did that, but it came up empty. When I spoke to his ex-wife, she told me that his truck was dark brown, and she said, but the description that investigators said they were looking for, they think was either white or light brown. So there was kind of a little bit of a discrepancy there. But this guy had quite a history. He was a tall guy, broad, muscular, kind of like a football player, like he would have been a really good high school football player type. But he was also, according to a police officer that I interviewed, who knew him well, because this guy was always getting in trouble. He was volatile, he was violent, he was unpredictable, and he was dumb enough and powerful enough to get into a fight with a police officer. He had 34 criminal cases in Massachusetts. 18 of them were vehicle cases, like not having a licensing or forging a motor vehicle document, that kind of crap. But he didn't have a history of assault with a minor, but he had been charged with disorderly conduct and larceny, assault and battery, payment for sex, ID theft, just kind of like a lot of stuff like that. And he had been in jail. He was also arrested years later for surfing porn websites at a public library. And the librarian had called the police. Police came over, and he got into the man in the pickup truck got into a scuffle with the cop. So he got arrested for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. When I interviewed his ex-wife, she kind of described him also as arrogant and somebody who didn't have a conscience. She said he had a sex addiction, that he used to blow his paycheck at strip clubs and sex workers. He had an overnight security job, and he lost that job because he would spend hundreds of dollars on their phone, calling what were called 900 phone calls, which, if you're old enough, you know what I'm talking about.
Nope. Just kidding. No idea.
For those who don't know, and there are many of you out there, and I remember these because I'm old enough, but you have a 1-900 phone number. This is before the internet. You could call this number, and it was for a lot of different things that they could make money off of. But you would call that number, and aside from just the normal phone charges, the people that you're calling could tack on additional charges for how long you would be on the call for. So it could be for something as innocent as, for example, the rock group Kiss used to have a 900 number years ago. You could get latest updates on what the band is up to. They would make money on this stuff. But, no surprise. I mean, there was also big business for people that would call and have, sexual conversations with a female on the other end. And so this is what this guy did, was that he would use the company phone late at night to call, these kind of dirty phone organizations and talk to women. So they would get these bills for hundreds and hundreds of dollars.
He didn't think that they were going to notice?
He was just a very impulsive person.
Yeah, that's definitely a deep-rooted addiction.
So he had that sex addiction. In fact, when he and his ex-wife, when they were married, they went to a marriage counselor, and the marriage counselor said, "You have a sex addiction." So when I have that piece and his impulsive nature, it just makes me really focus on him even more.
All right, we're going to take a quick break for commercial. And just a reminder, folks, that we will return at the end of this conversation with some final thoughts.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
When he and his ex-wife were married, they lived in an apartment building, and one of their neighbors was a couple. The girl was 17 years old, and her newlywed husband was 18 years old. And she was pregnant. And the man in the pickup truck propositioned her that he, hey, I think you're beautiful. I want to get to know you. He would make sexual comments. And of course, the girl was freaked out. And her husband ended up throwing a hammer at him one day and just missed his head by inches. But this was the kind of impulsive behavior. And there are other examples too, which were so kind of stomach turning, I didn't want to repeat it. I think you kind of get the point.
Yeah, but you did say that this individual was never charged with or never had any allegations of anything that had to do with underage kids, right? There was nothing like that?
Well, certainly that whole story about the 17-year-old girl and certainly is...
Yeah.
Certainly law enforcement would have a thing or two to say about that. However, there was another case which I didn't want to repeat because it's so vile. Yeah, I think it would have turned off the listeners too much. But this was coming from his ex-wife, so I had every reason to believe it. And I guess what I'm saying is, people or men generally have done a lot of things which are illegal and could land them in jail, but they don't get caught.
Yeah, for sure. What did his ex-wife tell you?
She gave me an interesting timeline about that particular day on August 5th. Of course, she gave me all this kind of background information that I shared with you already about his sex addictions. She told me that when she gave birth to one of their children, that it was a daughter, they had a girl, and he disappeared while she was still in the hospital recovering with the newborn. And he disappeared for days. And then he came back and she was freaked out. And she said, "Where were you?" And he just started gaslighting her. And then he said, "Well, that was your punishment for having a girl and not a boy." He was just cruel. He was cruel. He was just a cruel man.
What did she say to him after he told her that?
You could only imagine.
Yeah.
You could only imagine. I'm sure it was not pleasant. But I said to her, I said, "Well, what do you say about that now?" And she said, he doesn't have a conscience. He just didn't care. He said he liked blonde girls. He liked young girls, but more like teenage age girls. He was attracted to that. I said, but he wasn't somebody who was attracted to girls as young as 10 years old. But he was somebody that he was arrogant. He was always getting fired because people couldn't stand it. I mean, not just about racking up expensive phone bills, but he worked a lot of carpentry jobs and a lot of construction jobs. And in a police report, he drove on that particular day. He was living in Sturbridge with his mother, who was in her 70s at the time. And she had a job working in a laundry at a local inn. She was at work, and he was out of work. Again, very common for him. So when he was out driving his truck mid-afternoon on August 5th, 1993, he spotted a cement truck. This is according to his ex-wife. He spotted a cement truck and decided he was going to follow it because he was hoping it would take him to a construction site, and then he could introduce himself to a foreman and make a pitch to get a job. And that's when he got pulled over. He got pulled over at a very short distance from where Holly was abducted. But when you kind of look at all this stuff that we just talked about, it's a lot of stuff that makes you go, wow. The big kicker with him is because I was talking about all my findings with his family. So Carla had said this guy was interviewed by investigators, and during that interview, he vaguely described something unique about the shirt that Holly was wearing that day. Stuff that only the killer would know, allegedly. That does not necessarily mean that he is responsible for her, because there are some other things that I think, as after I've put these episodes out there, that um, certainly continues to bring a little doubt in my mind. But he's definitely somebody who knows a thing or two.
Were there any other details aside from the shirt that he knew that no one else knew?
I don't know. But that's a very revealing detail.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Now that doesn't mean that he is guilty. I mean, he was also somebody who liked to hunt and fish, and he knew the Brimfield area very well too. Again, if you like to hunt and fish, you probably know this area. And if you're somebody who's a little shady or a lot of shady, you know this area. And that was him. So did he do it? Perhaps. I don't know. Has he ever been named by law enforcement? No. And so I can't do that either. However, it is possible too that he could have stumbled upon her remains before anyone else had discovered it and noticed a detail about her and told investigators that. I don't know. That's my speculation about that. It's very tough. It's very tough for the family.
Yeah, I can imagine. But so he's got a vehicle that matches some of the descriptions, had access to the area where Holly went missing, and was familiar with the area, where Holly was found. So he's kind of the only one that seems to check all of those boxes.
I wouldn't say the only one. But he does check a lot of boxes. Yes, you're right about that.
Was he the only one we spoke about that checks those boxes, or are there other folks that we haven't spoken about?
There are others. I don't want to kind of get too deep into that, because Holly's aunt asked me not to kind of get into names of other people, because she's very protective of the investigation, and I respect that. Everything I've told you, I've told Holly's family ahead of time, and they've kind of blessed me to talk about this with the caveats, of course, that we mentioned. I will say this: after the podcast went out, and it got some publicity, it got some listeners, of course, and the Telegram did a story on it. Telegram is a central Massachusetts paper, kind of the daily out here, for those that don't know. And in that, somebody had read the story, and then they listened to the podcast, and they found the website that the retired investigators had put out. And she sent me an email. She said, those two teenage girls, August 5th, 93, the investigators said that two teenage girls who were getting ready to go on a vacation with their family, they were cousins, went to the mailbox. Their house is on Allen Road. And when they went to go check the mail, a truck drove by, brown pickup truck drove by, and went from 40 miles an hour to walking speed. And according to the investigators, that person leered at them. So they kind of retreated and went back up the driveway. They came back again, and he returned again, going the other way. And same thing, leering, they turn around, they retreat. And Eventually, one of the girls goes upstairs to a bathroom that happened to face Allen Road, and she notices the truck once again driving by, only this time it just kept going. So the investigators think that person is the one responsible, and that these two teen girls were eyewitnesses. So I got an email after the episodes went up, and the person who sent the email said, "Hey, I was the teenage girl, and there are some things in this narrative from the investigators that are wrong, and I'd like to talk to you." I said, "Okay, great." So I did. I checked it out. She was legit. She said, "It was just me." She said, "My cousin was not with me." She said, "I don't know why they said that, but it was only me." She said, "The other thing about that was I was not scared when I saw them." She said, "In the police narrative, in the narrative on the website, it said that we were so scared that we ran back because we were afraid that the guy was going to jump out and nab us." She said, "It was just me, and I never felt that way." She said, "I was creeped out, but I didn't think that at all." And she said, "When I went up to the window and I looked out and I saw the truck driving by," she said, I didn't get a sense that he was speeding away like something had just happened." She said, I didn't get that impression at all." So I said to her, "What happened later that time?" And she said, "Well, we went on our vacation, we came back, and then we realized what had been gone on with this abduction." She said, "I was interviewed by investigators. And in 1993, I looked at mugshots, and I picked out one person." And she said, "Probably about 7 years ago now, fast forward." And she said, "About 7 years ago, a different investigator who is now in charge of that investigation met up with me, and he showed me mugshot book again." And she said, "And I picked the same guy again." And I said, "That's pretty damn impressive that you could do that." And I said to her, "Do you remember his name?" And she said, she started like hemming and hawing, and trying to remember. And so I uttered the name of the man in the pickup truck that we spent a long time talking about. And she said, "No, that's not it." And then I went, "Oh God." I thought to myself, "Oh God." And then I thought of somebody else that was sitting in my file box, and I had a big thick file on it, but I didn't have anything that would connect him to the area at the time. And I said, "Is it," and I said, "Well, do you remember, you don't remember his name at all?" And then she kind of uttered his first name of that other person. And then I said that person's last name. And she said, "Yep, that's him." And I said, "Can we meet?" And she said, "Sure." And then she canceled because she got a phone call from the lead investigator asking not to talk.
Was that just coincidental timing, or did the lead investigator somehow find out that you had been communicating with her?
I had mentioned it to Carla, Holly's aunt, and I think that she had then repeated it to the lead investigator, and the lead investigator asked her not to call that woman up and said, "Please don't." And that's kind of where we are right now. Carla and I stay in contact. She tells me things about that person, and I don't know if that will lead to another episode or another series. I have no idea. But that's kind of where we left. And it was a humbling experience, because I think one of the things I said in one of the early episodes is that, just when you think you're on the money and you're zooming in on something really good, and then all of a sudden things get complicated, and all of a sudden it's not what you thought it was. So it's very humbling, I think. But I think it's important to stay honest with everybody about one thing or another. The person I profiled, the man in the pickup truck, well, there's certainly a lot of pickup trucks that look just like that. But that person, he still knows a thing or two, directly or indirectly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing
Great
work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Definitely really, really compelling stuff. And I guess, does it leave you hopeful to some degree that there are still holdbacks and investigators protecting information?
I think it will come down to two things if this case gets solved. I think it will either come down to DNA or it'll come down to a confession. I think that the investigators are pretty much at this point are principally focused on DNA. You know, in 1993, DNA technology was really just emerging and it was becoming a tool for investigations. And as we all know, it's becoming more and more of a tool. And the technology has improved. And there is still hope that whatever evidence that they have that they're testing, that they're going to get to a point where the DNA technology will give them a hit that they'll be able to indict somebody. I don't know if we'll ever get there, but I hope so for the family's sake. If you're in Brimfield, if you're in Sturbridge, Massachusetts, if you know anything at all, no matter how small it might be, please reach out to the Hampden District Attorney's Office in Springfield, Massachusetts. And the website is hampdenda.com. And you can also call the Massachusetts State Police Detective Unit at 413 505 5946, or the State Police Unresolved Cases Unit at 855 627 6583. And you can also text the word solve to 274 637 from your cell phone. If you so wish, after you've done that, you may also reach out to me and let me know. I'm at shortwalkmedia1@gmail.com, and my hotline number is 508 614 9367.
Okay, and we are back here for some final thoughts after the full interview with Richard Price of Holly's Been Taken. And it is quite a feat of podcasting. It's really a great work of investigative journalism. And it doesn't seem like this has been done by anyone else. So big kudos to Richard for putting this information out there. This is certainly a case that needed something like this. And I'm so glad he came along to do this.
I'm second you on that, like ditto, absolutely. It's pretty rare that you see somebody come in and just tell the story and then get out. You know, he did this a little while ago, a few years ago. He told the story and wanted it just to live out there in the public sphere, live out there so that people can Google Holly Piirainen and this will come up. His podcast will be something that they can use as a resource to figure out what happened to her. What's this story here? And it's not solved, right? So this has to be out there as long as possible. If there's a way where Richard can start producing new episodes about it, if he can do some updates, we would love that, because he's more than welcome to come back on this show anytime he wants. And we encourage our colleagues, our peers who do podcast content, who do true crime content. If you do interviews, look up Richard, look up us, shoot us a message. We'll make the connection, because he is a great person to have on for this story. And I kind of hope that he tackles other ones too.
Well, it does seem like he might have another episode coming, because right at the end of the interview, I really expected him to say that the man who drove the pickup truck was like officially the best suspect in his mind, but he doesn't actually say that, Lance. He kind of goes into another anonymous person who could be just as suspicious as the man who drove the brown pickup or any of the other folks that we spoke about who are also extremely suspicious. The Stangers, Rodney and his brothers and his father, very strange. Louis Lent, we got into, Dave Pouliot. So there's no shortage of, very, I would call them suspicious people surrounding this case. In my opinion, probably no more than the person who drove the brown pickup. But again, once again, there's this other unknown person that Richard has some reports on and may produce a new episode on. I really hope he does.
Yeah, same. And I remember feeling like, wow, that was such a curveball. Like, where was this coming from at the end of our conversation? And then I realized, like, okay, he wasn't saving it to be like a bombshell. That's just the way he operates in his investigation. He's not trying to be sensational about anything. If he wanted to get like the hook, if he wanted to like hook people, he would have like teased that throughout the conversation, but that's just not his style, which I thought is so impressive. He just brought it up when it was time to bring it up in the conversation, which is so responsible in my eyes. And I remembered thinking like, what? Like we've been going for this long, and now we have this bit of information. So amazing.
Yeah.
Just amazing. And I hope everybody continued to listen right to the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a very interesting part. So yeah, I don't know, Lance, this is a very mysterious case. We did talk about DNA a little bit, and he kind of says at the end that DNA is one angle that could solve the case, and it seems like the investigators who are working on the case in an official capacity are focused on that angle. So we know that DNA can bring definitive answers. Seems like the technology has come a long way, obviously, as we know, since 1993. But there hasn't been any match as of today. Doesn't mean there can't be, doesn't mean they can't extract more or whatever they need to do. I don't know. I'm not privy to it, but hopefully there is some DNA there from the killer, and there can be a match made.
Yeah. One question that I wanted to ask him, and maybe he's listening now and he can shoot us an email, but I wanted to ask him, like, what kind of person can do something like this to a child, to a young girl, and then slip back into society? Like, in my way of thinking or my naivete, this person would have, like, stuck out. Like, this person would have been the person that you'd look at and say, that person's always been kind of strange. That person's always had a reputation of being a little handsy with kids, or always being seen like around playgrounds or something like that. But I wanted to ask Richard, in his opinion, how does somebody do something like this and then almost seamlessly go back into the community that they're from? Even if the person's not from Sturbridge or the surrounding towns, they're still going back into their community after doing what they did to Holly, which they must like stand out so much.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is, we talked about Louis Lent. Like, he did not go back to a normal life,
That's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was arrested shortly after Holly went missing, too. Rodney Stanger seemed to have succumbed to drugs and paranoia, and he murdered his girlfriend. So that's another guy who I guess you can say did not go back to any normal life. Dave Pouliot, I don't think we'd be here talking about him if he had a normal life either. So I don't know. It seems like a collection of people who really didn't go back to, being off the radar in any way. They're just like odd people, strange people surrounding this case. And it's almost shocking to me, but at this point, it's typical that there are this many weird people surrounding the case,
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, if the DNA comes back and it's not one of the aforementioned suspects, then I'm totally baffled as to who this person could be. But yeah, great point. Like, all the people that we talk about definitely stood out as being unsavory people. So
yeah,
maybe my question is already answered. Like, look at who we got. They're not integrating into society in a seamless, like, incognito way.
Yeah, No, it's true. As far as I know, anyway. But I guess we don't know too much about that last suspect. It does seem like the brown pickup driver also had some, red flags around him for a lot of his life. But the person we don't know is the last person that Richard brought up, so I'm not sure about that. But yeah, it's certainly an interesting case. I really want there to be some movement in this official investigation.
Oh, right? Because, what are we coming up on here? We're coming up on 93, so...
35.
30, yeah.
And in just a few years here.
I mean, we're going on more than 3 decades, which...
Yeah.
Come on. I don't want to say unacceptable, but it's unacceptable.
Yeah. Well, it seems like the Hampden District Attorney's office is on it now. So if you have any information... You can reach out to them at hamdenda.com, or you can call the Massachusetts State Police Detective Unit at 413-505-5993, or the State Police Unresolved Cases Unit at 855-627-6583. So hopefully there are some tips that come in about this case, and let's get this case wrapped up.
And I don't want it to go unspoken here that there's this haunting connection between Holly and Molly Bish. And I think that is just such a tragic link between the two individuals here, between the two families. And Molly Bish had written to Holly Piirainen's family and said, "I'm very sorry. I wish I could make it up to you. Holly is a very pretty girl. She is almost as tall as me. I wish I knew Holly. I hope they found her." And she wrote that when she was 10 years old.
Yeah, it's really tragic. And she would later go missing and be found murdered, all in the same areas. Not the same towns exactly, but similar areas. And, their cases are forever linked because of the location, the time frame. I mean, their names are even eerily similar, and that letter.
Yep. Right, and you're right. The area... very close. So she was in Warren, Massachusetts. So this is Western Massachusetts. And that was about 7 years after Holly disappeared and was found murdered. And just super haunting that she wrote that to the family at 10 years old. And 7 years later, she is the victim of the same type of fate.
Yeah, quite haunting. Well, thank you very much for listening. We really appreciate it. Please like and subscribe, and make sure to share or tell a friend about this, and make sure to binge Richard's Holly's Been Taken series. It is truly great work. So we appreciate you listening. Thank you very much.